Share the live, share the live. It's your boy DJ Maurice Again coming here from Montpelier, Nevis. I'm here with Daddy Gaskell, the man James Gaskell, trying to get a little background on him and his arrival here in Nevis and his contribution to the island of Nevis and its people. So I'm going to pan my camera around right about now, and I'm going to ask Daddy Gaskell to introduce himself and just give a brief background, as you would say, a synopsis of himself and his arrival here in the lovely Queen City. Daddy Gaskell, Brother James, you're up.
I'm on now, am I?
You're live.
Well, thank you, DJ, and it's really good to see you here, even with your equipment, asking me to tell everyone too much about myself. But I will try and go back to the very beginning, as you suggest. I was born in London in 1937 to a mother who was for a while a professional nurse and then a housewife, and to a father who was in the army for 5 years in the 1930s, and then was, as it happened, with by then no father, some inherited wealth. He went travelling, and he went travelling throughout Europe in particular, and he became very interested in Ukraine, curiously, and he thought that Ukraine really needed to be a free nation, which it wasn't at the time, because it was in the Soviet Union. Anyway, many years later, it became a free nation, and you now see it what it is. Also, in his travels, he went off to what was then called Abyssinia, but is now Ethiopia. This was at the time when the fascist leader of Italy decided that he needed an empire to keep up with France and Britain, so he invaded Abyssinia, Ethiopia. And my father managed to get a correspondence alliance contract with, I think, the Evening Standard and maybe the Daily Telegraph to go to Abyssinia to cover the war. And among other things, he had an audience of Haile Selassie, the emperor at the time. So that might be of interest to our Rasta folk, that my father did actually meet up with Haile Selassie. And he made a little report on it that I have somewhere. Anyway, I born in 1937, then comes the war, and my father is conscripted or volunteers back into the army, and after a while he is talent spotted as a Russian speaker because he had taken the advantage of being seconded, I think, to a family in Ukraine during his army service, and he was enabled to speak Russian. So come back to the war, 1941, he was talent spotted to go off to Moscow as one of our 3 men military mission members. And so he went there, and he made his reports back to the Foreign Office, and I think to my mother too. And then he came back for his first leave in 1943, and the trip that time was from Moscow to Cairo, not direct because you couldn't go over any of the countries that Germany was occupying. So he went to Cairo, and then it was to go back to England. But his plane blew up over the Egyptian desert, and of course he and all the other passengers were killed, which brings it to me in a way, and why I had no father for a while, and why when I became 21 I had the family money, not a great deal, but I did have much more than someone who had no family money, because father was not there to use it or own it. So I went through a standard semi-upper class background, which was to go to private schools, and then it being 1956 when conscription was on, and when I was 18 I went to do national service in the army in the Coldstream, and then I was commissioned out of the Coldstream into the Dorset Regiment, and in the Dorset Regiment I was in Germany for about 9 months. And then after that, 1958, I came back and went to Cambridge University, where I read economics for 1 year and law for 2. And then I did a short social studies diploma at London University. And then I started working as an estate agent with a friend of mine called Charlie Michel. And a little bit later, I got interested in making an investment outside England. And I thought that we had some contact in the West Indies, namely in St Kitts, Nevis, Anguilla, since a friend of the family was Colonel Henry Howard, who was the administrator. And we used to see Henry from time to time, and he said, at any time, come and stay with me before I'm sacked. So I and my younger brother, Tom, together with my friend Charlie Michel, came to stay with him at Christmas 1963. And we then proceeded over to Anguilla to have a look at Anguilla. We looked at St Kitts and we looked at Nevis, all with the prospect and hopeful intention of buying some land. What to do with it was then indeterminate. And a little bit later, after coming to Nevis and being brought by the lady who was our first taxi driver, I forget her name, but she was wife of John Wade, and she was a Dutch girl. She would be known to the older citizens. And so then the idea was conceived of building a hotel, and that turned out to be Montpellier. I was, of the three, the lead person always. Charlie continued to look after his little estate agency, and Brother Tom had a job in London which he couldn't really leave. So we proceeded, and we left then, I suppose in January, and I came back certainly in August 64, this would have been, and saw Honkins, Sam Honkins. Now there were two builders who I was told were decent builders in Nevis at the time. One was a chap called Donovan, who was American, but I was also advised that he was a dodgy character. And anyway, I liked Sam Honkins, and we got on very well, and we came to an arrangement to do a cost-plus development of this hotel at Montpellier, which was to be done converting, or at least making use of most of the ruins that there were at the Montpellier works. Not the Great House, where apparently Nelson was married, because that was done as ruins to the ground. But this one was still fairly standing. The mill was still there, and the boiler room was there as far as all the stonework went. There was no roof. And there was a small tower next to it. Well, when Honkins got to look at it first, he decided that much of the walls had to come down because they were not safe anymore. That was using the, of course, that they used the old kind of mortar. And I know for a fact that later, on some parts of the mill, which were subject to the wind and rain, being on the windward side, that you could actually go to the joins between the stones and you could crumble out the mortar between them. So he was quite right. We had an architect for, I don't remember who it was, if I ever knew, who Honkins obtained from some kits. And we, which is really meaning Honkins and me, walked around and decided where everything should go. I decided that we wanted a great room where all the guests would get together on the exact site and position and location of the boiler room, because it seemed to be an excellent size, and indeed it has turned out to be so. And then I suppose we redesigned it to fit in with how we thought people might walk, might go to whatever next they wanted to be. And we designed some arches to make a gallery around on the windward side, so that there wouldn't be too much trouble from wind and rain coming in directly into the great room itself. Clearly you don't want guests interrupted by wind and rain. So the idea was always to build a hotel with quite wide verandas, and so that's how it turned out to be. Well, the next stage was really to get it built. So the procedure then was for me to go back to England armed with a list of quantities from Honkins for materials he thought it best to get in England, because at the time practically everything that came to St Kitts Nevis was out of the United Kingdom. We didn't have the America connection, which is now so strong. We had, I think it would be the Booker line, coming from England, and they would be the banana boats that required something to bring back on the other way. So they were required and very useful for bringing all conveyances required from the other end. So I found next to our little estate agency in the north of London, a very small firm that was experts, and they managed to find the various suppliers with whom I could contract and buy, and they made the export arrangements to send all these goods that Hunkins required. I imagine that was lumber, metal joists, tin roof, all the rest of it, plumbing, electricity, etc., etc. All the things that you require to get the building for a small hotel going. So that worked well, and Hunkins made use of it. I was very impatient as a young and first-time builder of such a thing, and I thought Hunkins was being very slow, and I was impatient about it. But I think upon reflection, it was really very difficult for him. It was his largest scheme to date, and he really managed it very well indeed. I remember him saying at one point, "If I could get a man." And what he meant by that was he just really needed a particular supervisor to come and make sure the things were done on the spot when he couldn't always be there. Anyway, I'm sure he did manage to get whoever was required because it proceeded smoothly. But I remember that the building construction and the arrangements for it were quite different then from now. You know, you've got backhoe, you've got excavators, you've got power tools, you've got less in the way of experts in any one line. You've got skilled masons, very skilled masons, skilled carpenters, and a very few electricians, and one or two plumbers. And that is the kit with which you had to work. And also, you couldn't send an 18-yard truck up to the stone crushing factory because there wasn't one. You sent your little putt-putt excavator, little tiny, with the driver behind this little bucket around, and it's on tyres on wheels. So it went around the countryside looking for these little piles of stone that people were breaking up, preparatory to selling them to builders who wanted them. So that was very different, and it made it obviously far more complicated. But I remember he built up quite a large pile of pound stone in the yard that is near our laundry room, which is another feature that he built some distance from the hotel buildings themselves. I think you have to have a pause while I decide next.
Okay, no problem. You just spoke about the pounding of the stones, and the little pot tractor will go around and get it. As young as I am, I had that experience as well, because in my little village in St. Paul, St. Kitts, my grandparents and many of those villagers that is how they made a living. They used to pound the stone, and the tractors will come to pick the stones and sell it to whoever.
Well, that's exactly what was happening in Nevis at the time. Well, of course, as people in Nevis will know, Montpelier is a country site. It is just the works for the Montpelier Sugar Estate, and it lies inland about 3/4 of a mile from the main island road. So when we conceived this scheme, although there was a road inland from Coal Hill to Bailey's Yard and on to Montpelier, and then down from Montpelier to Cox Village, there was no sort of hard surface. So I had to put in a 2-track from Coal Hill to Montpelier, which is about 3/4 of a mile. And I also had to bring the electricity because there wasn't any. And I brought it down the hill in the direction of Cox and then up the hill from where those who know Nevis a bit know that Franklin Stapleton, Eddie Richards and others now live. Down at that corner, I brought it then up the hill to Montpelier. But it meant also that the electricity poles were brought that much nearer to Cox Village. So the government was at that stage or later able to take it on. I having done just a bit of the first expensive work of bringing the posts in to that distance. So anyway, we had by then electricity, but the water had to be brought in from the system, which again is a government system and lies down in that very same area just beyond where Franklin Stapleton and Eddie Richards live, right at the bottom of a steep hill. And I should mention that now there is a road all the way and direct from Coal Hill to Cox, because at a later stage I went through the bush from where Franklin lives, up the hill, through the bush, practically on all fours at that stage, because I understood that there was a track there, and there was a track. So at some stage I got Hunkins Jr., so this was later, to make the road down, to make it a direct path, Coal Hill to Cox. But that's all much later. I'm still in 1964. So we then proceed, and building goes on, and into 1965, and I'm coming and going between Nevis and England. Not very long in Nevis at each time, but just checking up and seeing if there's anything new that I have to be doing in England. Well, we have to come forward to about 1966. And 1966, I know that by October 1966, after a lot of difficulty with all the finishing, including requiring to do the paint work again. I bought some paint rather badly, for not washing out the sand, the salt from the sand, and that's why it bubbled up and it was no good, flaked off. But it wasn't. I just bought a bad issue of paint. You know what it is sometimes. Those manufacturers of whatever it is treat places like this as the end of the line where they can get rid of a dud product. And I'm sorry to say, I got a dud product from an English manufacturer, whoever it was, on that occasion. And I now know that I should never have blamed companies for it. And I hope I told them so. I think I did. So that was the paintwork. There was another difficulty, which was down to Hampkins, and that was the swimming pool. I think probably we must have filled it first time and it started leaking. So he then had to take up the whole section of what was the deep end and redo the base, the foundation, because that was not good enough. Anyway, he remade it, redid it, and it's worked, as far as I'm aware, without a leak ever since. Thank goodness. So, come October 1966, we were ready for our first guest. We'd got the furnishings in, and I should say that everything at the very beginning was extremely primitive. The property itself was very bare. And I remember thinking, I'm not quite sure whether the wind or how I conceive politics these days is the worst of the two problems. We were definitely bothered by the wind. However, now that's all taken care of because there's so much growth, but it was very bare at the time. And the whole site looked bare and, I'm sorry to say, entirely uninviting. And I'm not surprised that we really didn't manage to get many guests at all to begin with. Anyway, we had a guest or two, and at that stage we had representatives in New York and in London, and the representatives brought us down a party of travel agents, but I don't think that anything came of it. Nothing, I think. But by that stage, late 66, very late 66, like December, I must have heard that Billy Herbert, who I did not know, that I had heard of, went down, was going to go to London on a delegation with Peter Adams, who was the sole representative in the St Kitts Nevis Anguilla Parliament for Anguilla. And I understood, and it turned out to be the case, that Billy was going up to tell the British government, I expect it was the Colonial Office, or whatever they named it at the time, that Mr Bradshaw would not be able to hold Anguilla, because Anguillans just did not want to remain under Bradshaw, and in particular if they were going to be pushed under Bradshaw, under the newly conceived construction called Associated State, in which St Kitts Nevis Anguilla would have full responsibility for everything except foreign affairs and defence, which would be left to the colonial government, Britain. And Billy was going to go to London to tell the minister that. Well, I thought this was all very well, but he was likely to be fobbed off with, I'm afraid, Dr. Herbert, that the minister is busy today. It's very good of you to come, but I can see you instead. And that would be just one of the senior civil servants, and nothing would happen. He would not get to see the minister, and he would really not have much to go home to boast about. What he wanted to do simply was to put his case and hope that it was believed and that something could be done about it. So, anyway, I made myself known, I do not remember the details, to Billy Herbert. And when it came time for him and his delegation of Peter Adams to go, I decided I'm going along. London is my city and I know more about it than they do, and I have better contacts in it. It so happened that I had two uncles, brothers, who were in, or had been in, the respective governments of the United Kingdom. One was a socialist and one was a conservative. And at some stage, the conservative one had been chairman of the Conservative Party, and at another stage, the other uncle, my mother's brothers, had been in Attlee's government as Postmaster General, and also he'd been Under Secretary of State for India at the time Britain gave away India in 1947. Gave away, decolonised, or whatever you call it, passed into independence. So somehow or other, I had contacts. And also the most helpful contact, as a matter of fact, was a journalist from the London Daily Mirror called, I think, David Smithers, who had been here, and I think I must have met, and I asked him who we should see when we got to London. This was as soon as I got to London with the other two. They were lodged in a London hotel, and I had a property in London myself. So, a call to David Smithers. I remember he told me that the Earl Jellicoe and another one called Lord Willis were two who might be particularly interested. And also my own MP from where I lived in Yorkshire, and knew vaguely, socially, and was a senior, very senior member of the Conservative Party. In fact, he was father of the House, which I think means the oldest standing MP, longest standing MP for the time. So he must have been helpful. Anyway, certainly, when we got there, we were late on in the West Indies Act procedure, which was the means by which the colonial power divested itself of whatever powers it had in order to make St Kitts Nevis an associated state. we were late on, meaning we were past the serious debating stage. It may be we arrived just before the third reading. I think that was probably what it was. Anyway, we did get contact with Jellicoe and with Willis. And Jellicoe just had a very speedy meeting, 5-minute meeting with Billy Herbert, saying, what do you want? And Billy said what he wanted, which is, as I've said, that Britain should not be doing this because Mr. Bradshaw will not be able to hold Anguilla. Jellicoe was amazingly fluent. He just had his 5 meeting with Billy, and he gave an exact exposition of Billy's position to the noble lords, and obtained the promise that the minister would see the delegation, which was the major reason for coming. So we did at least get to see the minister a day or so, or a few days later, a lady called Judith Hart. So I do remember going with Billy and Peter Adams. I think we went twice. Certainly on the first occasion we went up, of course by appointment, and we went into the waiting room. And in the waiting room there was another chap from the West Indies who I did not know at the time, and a senior civil servant named Hall, who again I did not know at the time, but who turned out to be the civil servant who was more or less in charge of our matter as well, turned up and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Gary, but the minister is unable to see you." And Mr. Gary was at the time the opposition leader in Grenada, later to be Prime Minister. And that was precisely the affair, the matter, the condition that I did not want to happen to Billy Herbert. Unfortunately, it did not happen, and we did see the minister. And Billy told the minister, as I have explained before, that St Kitts would not be able to hold Anguilla because Anguilla did not want St Kitts. He didn't explain how this would happen, but he just said that it would happen. And he said that Bradshaw would be asking for warships in order to re-invade Anguilla. That's as far as he got with it. And the minister said, "Okay, I'm going to send my official, Mr. Hall, to have a look." So Billy went back home to St Kitts and told the people about it, and had political meetings, big meetings in what was called Pall Mall Square, now Independence Square. And I stayed in England for a while. And among other things, I remember Billy telegrammed me to ask me what I knew about a company called Indelco, because Mr. Bradshaw was saying that it was coming to do a major development in St Kitts, and he wanted me to check them out. So I went to check out these people called, this little, as it turns out, to be a little company called Indelco, and I found out that they had been recently formed, and there were 2 real estate agents from the Cromwell Road, i.e. real estate hustlers, the usual trouble that we have here in St Kitts Nevis. We have real estate hustlers who come along and want to buy a bit of land and sell it again before they've had to pay for it. And that, I suspect, was exactly what Indelco was. Anyway, I told Billy about it, and no doubt he told the people, and we heard nothing more about Indelco anymore. Among other things, when we saw Lord Willis and Lord Jellicoe in the House of Lords, we said, well, Bradshaw won't like this, and he'll lock us up. No, he won't do that. He won't do that, they said. But anyway, call us if he does. So I go back to England. And at some stage, I'm maintaining my friendship with Billy Herbert and with Michael Powell, who I had then met, who was another senior person in the then PAM party, the new PAM party. PAM, I believe, was started in 1966 only by Billy Herbert in Anguilla. So I'm back in St Kitts again with Billy and Michael. We do things like going off spearfishing and so on. And Billy said he was going up to Anguilla for a bit of spearfishing, and would I like to come? And I did like to come, so I took my spear gun and myself and went up to Anguilla. Fairly soon after I got there, and before doing any spearfishing, Billy said, "You've got to get out of here, something may be happening." So I took a private charter with a chap called Clayton, maybe Clayton Powell. Anyway, the poor chap was lost in his own plane later, but fortunately for me, it was not on that occasion. And he took me to St Martin, and I went back to St Kitts and Nevis. It turns out that the something was obviously to do with Anguilla declaring that it was independent from St Kitts, and Billy didn't want me being involved in it, so he sent me away rapidly. So I wasn't involved in it, and I didn't know quite what was going on at the time, but I left because I was told to. So then, later, I'm at the hotel with no guests really, back in April, May 1966. I think it must have been. And if I have it right, when would it have been? I forget the exact date when Anguilla turfed out. It could have been April, it could have been May the 29th, 1966, but it might not have been. It could have been that time when Anguilla turfed out. The St Kitts police put them on a plane, took over the police station and the very few weapons they had, and put them on a plane for St Kitts and blocked the runway. And it was then, of course, that Bradshaw did ask Britain for warships, because he had no navy and had no means of getting up to Anguilla to, quote, take it back. So this proceeded, of course, for the next 2 years, the Anguilla kind of crisis. And that ended in about April, May '69, 2 years later, after a great deal of trouble and semi-independent Anguilla looking after itself, and then I think having Britain having a commissioner put in, and then I think sending a minister called Whitlock, who left a lot of leaflets with the Anguillans saying it is no part of our purpose to return you to an administration you do not want. Now the only administration, of course, Anguilla did not want and had declared it did not want was that of St Kitts. But Britain at the same time, with a lot of pressure from the United Nations Decolonisation Committee, did not want to be recolonising Anguilla. But that in fact was exactly what it did, but it never really named it and never really admitted it. And in fact, digressing a little bit, back in perhaps forwarding to 1969, and I've missed out a lot that I will come back to, but forwarding to 1969, I remember going with a friend of mine to see some senior officials in the colonial office, the ones who were responsible for St Kitts, to tell them. I lost the train of thought.
Okay, well, you started speaking about
I can't now remember what I was. Oh yes, I do remember vaguely. We were going to tell them that in fact, because my friend was doing a scholarship work on decolonisation, we were going to tell him that Britain had recolonised Anguilla de facto and possibly de jure too, and that he had written an article about it to one of the newspapers. Well, unwisely, when he was asked which newspaper have you written to, he said the Daily Telegraph. So there was no article in the Daily Telegraph, and we suspect, of course, that the civil servant had got at the Daily Telegraph and said, you can't publish this, or you won't receive any further details from us about anything that's going on, because that's the way I think they operate. So there was no article. Anyway, let me leave that and go back to 1967. So Anguilla has thrown out the police. And is virtually on its own. It's got no Bradshaw. It's virtually on its own. And Britain doesn't want it and doesn't know what to do. So what happened next, of course, in St Kitts is what people talk about a lot, and that is the state of emergency. Bradshaw declared a state of emergency in St Kitts and Nevis, I suppose in Nevis, anyway in St Kitts and Anguilla, even though the event that disturbed the Federation was in Anguilla only. He declared a state of emergency with distinct extra legal powers. And those powers, among other things, gave him the ability to detain individuals. Now, I was due to leave St Kitts on or around, I think it was June the 10th, June the 11th, 1967. There were no guests at Montpellier. I was going back to England and closing the hotel. My then manager...
Okay, have your drink of water. You've been going at it for some time. Yes, good people. Here having a conversation with the brother, Daddy James Gaskell, giving some background on his arrival here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. And he has detailed some very important information. And we're going to try and get as much more as we can, as we know that these opportunities, they don't come around regular. So it's good to hear from his experience here, someone who was involved on the ground, knew the facts to be presenting it to the people. So Daddy Gaskell, continue when you're ready.
DJ, I don't have your stamina or your voice power for this, but I do my best. I don't know whether there's a great deal more to tell, but come that day, I had closed up the hotel and sent our managers at the time, who were an English couple, back to England. Or they were to go back a few days later, I think. And they may or may not come back again, because it was clear that their work permit was unlikely to be renewed. I think because this was because they had crossed Eugene Walwyn, who was the Nevis lawyer and political figure in Nevis at the time, and who was an ally of Bradshaw, or else in his government. I think he was Attorney General, actually, at the time. So I was there, I wanted to leave, and I went back to, I went over to St Kitts, because there were no direct flights, I suppose, from Nevis to Anguilla at the time. I went over to St Kitts on perhaps the night of June the 9th, and I was due to leave on June the 10th. And then I remember that the barman at the Palms Hotel, where I was staying for that night, said that the police are going around and they are locking up people. And then later he said, they're looking for you. So I thought, well, so be it, I suppose, I thought. If they're looking for me, I'd better go to the airport and leave, since I've got my ticket. And I spoke at the time, because he was there also, to a reporter from Reuters, who just said, oh well, if you're locked up, I'll put your name on the list as well. So I go off to the airport, and I think I must have informed my lawyers, who were Kawaja and Crawford, Reggie, and I go off to the airport, and I present my ticket to the ticket counter, and he says, Mr. Gaskell, you will not be permitted to travel. And very shortly after that, a jeep rolls up and 4 policemen get out wearing British Army tin hats, tin helmets, and carrying .303 rifles. headed by one Inspector Edgings, who I knew at the time. I can't remember where, possibly in Anguilla, I don't remember. Anyway, they must have read out to me my detention order. I can't say I remember exactly what the detention order said, but it was clear that I was detained. So they get me into their jeep and they take me off from the airport to the Bastille prison, where I am processed and admitted to the yard. And I see from the inside of the front entrance that there are some chaps who I know. I suppose Billy Hubbard and Michael Powell and others who I got to know later, who are on the other side of the prison yard, shouting out, "Freedom!" So I'm then just shoved out into the prison yard, and I imagine told to go into this particular bed space. Well, we were lucky we were detainees, and we had a very sensible and decent prison superintendent who admittedly had never had a detainee rather than a prisoner to deal with before. And these detainees were not at all like prisoners, because these were all political persons. And I can tell you, those that I got to know later, and became friends in particular with some of them. One of them was John Reynolds, who at the age of 59 was a retired police inspector. One was Corporal Sutton, who was also in the police. And there was a chap called, Hendrickson. Anyway, I forget. Shelton Warner, Ashley Grant, Val Smith, Michael Powell, who may at that stage have been charged, or may have been a detainee, I'm not sure. And there is a bit of a difference as to what they were allowed to do, detainee or prisoner. So anyway, and Vernon Fleming, I remember, in Anguillan, but also in St Kitts, and quite a leading member of the PAM at the time. Oh, and young Michael Morton, 17 at the time, later to be chairman of TDC. So there I am. Now I'm admitted into what was the chapel room for the prison. They turned it out in order to make room for prisoners. And there were another, I don't remember, 5, 6, 7, 8 other persons in it. There was plenty of room. And persons outside, which may have been Henry Howard, who was not the administrator by then, just a private citizen, made arrangements for me to be supplied with a camp bed, so I did not have to sleep on a concrete floor, which would have been the alternative. So I was lucky. I think others were supplied with beds also, but I can't be sure. I hope so. Also, we were again lucky, being detainees, we were allowed to bring in outside meals. So I did not have to have the very poor prison diet. And I had meals brought in from Mr. Nichols's seaside hotel. as did Jeff Broom. Jeff Broom, who was, I think, then the leading light in the company that later became TDC. So what I remember of inside prison, of course, is how it was in the prison yard and how it was that I made friends with various persons, and I liked in particular Moonlight, and we became good friends. Moonlight was maybe 20 years older than me, and I became good friends with Ashley Grant and Valley Smith, and of course Michael Powell and Billy Herbert in particular. Now they're all dead except for Michael Powell. Moonlight died a good number of years ago, shortly after I came back again. And I came back again in 1980 when the government changed and became PAM. And they allowed me back because, which I have jumped to slightly, after 42 days of detention, I was summarily expelled and sent back as persona non grata to England. And that persona non grata lasted, in spite of applications over the 13 years of my being away, throughout the then different Labour governments. So I was unable to come back and try to deal with my investment in Montpellier Hotel. So it really couldn't do anything very much without me, the leading light, being there to put in the necessary investment and supervise a manager and try to get the business going. So it tipped over, making losses year by year by year, until I could get back. And this was hard, because one never knew when, if one would get back and be able to revive this investment of my family money. And I should say, it was my family money, and a lot of it. We are not a particularly rich family, and it was a lot of our family money, and my two brothers, my two younger brothers, also should have had a part of it. And they had it locked up in what turned out to be a very foolish investment at the time made by their eldest brother. Anyway, all's well that ends well. And back in 1980, we got going on reviving, but that's a long way off. It was hard for me, certainly, and them, I believe, and we had lots of discussions about this investment and, in fact, how to sell it. And we met people, and they gave us such ludicrous offers that fortunately we said no. Now, where would I be now? I would still be in prison in 1967. One or two little things going on, I do remember. I remember that there was a commission set up, the West Indies Commission set up specially under the laws of detention, the Act of Detention, whereby this commission of other West Indians came down to investigate us, the detainees. And I know I said I had a little discussion with them. And either they said, oh, well, that's just a businessman's complaint about the government, so perhaps it was. because I wasn't in a position, frankly, to have a serious political complaint about the government. I remember one occasion on which, since we had and were permitted a radio in the prison as detainees, a lady came on from, I expect, the British Overseas Service to the West Indies. She came on, and someone said, "Lock her off." And I said, "No, you can't do that, that's my cousin." And the lady speaking was a lady called Lady Ranfurly, who was the wife of my father's first cousin, Daniel Ranfurly, Lord Ranfurly, who had been Governor General of the Bahamas in the 1950s. And she, Lady Ranfurly, had been much concerned about education in the Bahamas and the lack of books and the availability of proper education to those in the Bahamas because of lack of books. So she started something which became quite famous, called the Ranfurly Library in the United Kingdom. She got going simply through her friends to start with. She appealed to all her friends, "Send me all and any books you have from your libraries so that I can send them out to the children in the Bahamas and the schools in the Bahamas." And this got going in a big way, to the extent that later, perhaps when I was back in Nevis for a very short spell in 1969, I happened to be swimming down at Pinney's. One chap who I was just swimming with turned out to be a Nevis teacher, and I asked him, "What's the best thing England has done for you in education?" He said, "The Ranfurly Library." So I thought, amazing. Anyway, I was told to lock her off and I said not. So I was glad about that. And I remember at some stage myself going to help her sort books in her apple shade, because that's the way it started out. Small, and then it grew, and then it was taken over by a large organisation. I don't know whether it's now named the Ranfurly Library, but I expect it still continues to send out books obtained in a rather more professional fashion than happened then. But I was glad of that, in that my relations are still doing something for places like this.
Well, Brother Paddy Gaskell, that's a lot of information you unpacked there. And I'm pretty sure the online viewers, I can see some of the comments, they appreciate you, and a lot of things that you have presented the general public did not know about. I know you've been skipping back and forth with the 67. It's just some clarity on that. You did say that you was arrested from the airport sometime around June 10th, 1967. And you was placed in the prison for some 40 plus days before you was sent back to England. We call it now deported.
Deported.
Correct, that's the word. For the people that want to understand the language, you were deported back to the UK. And having invested a great deal of your family funds here in Nevis, there was no way of continuing your business. As a result, your business suffered a great deal for more than 13 years.
Yes, I would say it's not only lack of funds. You can't really put investment into a little operation unless you're on the ground to see what's up.
Okay.
You can't just give it to somebody and say, go and do that, go and restore it. They may leave with it, they may put it in the wrong place. You have to do it yourself. So I had to wait till I got back. And that was the hard part. And it was in fact, when I got back, a hard part too. I had to sell up a lot of things that I would not have sold up or been obliged to sell up. But I had to, because there was nothing else. I had to sell up some pictures and furniture and other things that I inherited in order to put some money into a derelict business. It was derelict. It was really, it had no prospect at all at the time. And we'd had two managers during my absence in the 13 years, two sets of managers. The first set was I'm sorry to say, a second-rate Englishman married to a Trinidadian. And he had been the manager at several of the other establishments in Nevis earlier. And I thought when I'd seen him, well, he's not the sort of chap I'd want managing my place. However, when Jack Wrigley rang me in England after I had been deported, and probably in 1968, after Montpellier had been closed with no prospect of me being there for some 8, 9, 10 months, and said that the Rapards are available to take over, I said, oh, okay, I'll take them on. So we did take them on, and they did last 7 years until I came back for a very short spell in 1973. The Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, came over to Basse-Terre on a short trip to open the Prince of Wales Bastion at Brimston Hill. And I rather think that Bradshaw thought I was a cousin of the Queen, because I had heard that rumour going around, and although I had said, I don't know about that, everybody's a cousin of the Queen, or I don't know about that. The rumour went around, and I think he thought it, and he must have thought, well, I can't have the Prince come over and ask me, where's my cousin James? So he allowed me back for 16 days, and I made the most of it in sacking the second-rate Englishman and his Trinidadian wife, and asking Marion Spencer Barham to take over, which they did, but they had no advantage really in so doing, and they could only maintain it in the rather parlous condition in which it was, and I cannot blame them for any kind of inability for the business to not get going. They were at least better than the second-rate Englishmen. And I even have one tale of an individual from England who I knew very vaguely and knew my friend Charlie Michel much better, going to Nevis and staying in Nevis and coming up to Montpellier at the time and finding a chain across the front entrance. Hotel was open, supposedly. Should have been. And the second-rate Englishman standing on the terrace immediately overlooking front entrance, and she calling up to him with the chain in front of her, "Can I come in?" "No," he said. "Go away." So that was, as soon as I came back, an immediate and clear reason why I say, "No more of that, second-rate Englishman, you're on your way." So I had the opportunity, fortunately, to get in Spencer and Mary Barron from that well-known Barron family. They were not natural hoteliers, and they had no advantage or opportunity, really, to make a serious claim on advancing the fortunes of Montpellier. It was just too much at the time.
You make mention of King Charles coming to St. Kitts.
King Charles,
The third?
King Charles.
King Charles,
Yeah.
the current king.
Yeah,
He came as a prince?
yes.
Okay. It's funny that last year, when I had a march on St. Kitts, yourself and your son there, my brother now, Charles Gaskell, came down to St. Kitts to support me in that march. And I received several calls the next day saying to me that I am a very powerful person because I have royalties, British royalties at the march. And I asked them what they're speaking about. And they said, "Don't you know that Mr. Gaskell is family to the royal family in the UK?" I said, "Well, we didn't discuss that. He never said that to me, so it's funny to hear you say now that that rumor was out there. It's still out there."
Well,
So,
I can tell you it's false,
okay.
but I didn't mind it being out there because it did, I do believe, help me come back in 1973, albeit only for 16 days. I could at least see Nevis again, change the managership, and that must have been helpful.
Okay, well, they always say if a name's going to help you, you drop it and it helps. Now, you spoke about the Montpellier Hotel. What's the status of that at the moment?
I think the status of that is excellent,
Still operational
very much so.
under your leadership or a different leadership?
We sold it in 2002.
Okay, all
We
right.
sold it to the Hoffmans. And I say the Hoffmans because at the time they came to operate it as a family of four, really. That was to say, Lincoln Hoffman, Muffin Hoffman, and their child Tim and his wife Meredith, and two very, very young children. But now it is just Muffin. Lincoln had died and Tim and Muffin left. And she does it marvellously. And we're very pleased and proud that she's taken it on from us and improved it immensely. And it's got a good international reputation.
Okay. Well, before we close, Daddy Gaskell, there's a matter that is currently hot topic in the Nevis area. It's started with a town hall meeting on July 5th of 2025, where a young lady by the name of Colin Lawrence questioned the Premier Brantley about some operations or some development to become on the south coast of Nevis. And at that meeting, she was told to go and read the Bible. He won't tell you of anything like that and whatever, but we know what happened next. By the 31st of July, the Prime Minister, Dr. Terence Drew, presented a SSD bill in Parliament in St. Kitts, and was seconded by the Premier Mark Brantley himself, the leader of the opposition. Never heard of that kind of stuff in history. And by the 11th of August 2025, that bill saw its second and third reading. And by the 21st, 22nd of August 2025, that bill became an act, by extension became law, which led us to Premier Brantley coming back to the people of Nevis in a national address stating that a proposal was sent to his office of a Destiny project and Nevis requiring certain elements of special opportunities to develop that area. Now, you're not a politician, but I want you to explain to the people your position, because you have wrote a couple of articles based on that particular project, and there was pushback from the Premier about you coming and owning a certain amount of lands on Nevis, comparing your situation to what's going on the south coast of Nevis. So I do not know if you can present some explanation on that.
I think that would take as long as we've already spent. I remember very clearly that clip of Carlin Lawrence and the arrogant fashion, demeaning fashion, I'm sorry to say, in which our Premier dealt with Carlin Lawrence, who just struck me at the time, and I did not know her, as a fine, upstanding, salt-of-the-earth Nevis grandmother. And I did not like her being dealt with in that summary, arrogant fashion of being going. All she was asking was, what do you know about this? And all she was told, more or less, was, it's all rumours. Go sit down, read your Bible. When in fact, of course, we now know it had been going on not for months, but for years. And that, I thought, was just another piece of disgraceful behaviour, which should be commented on. And that's why I have actually written 8 articles, rather than just 2, on this very same subject.
Okay.
But as you all know, because it's now been out in the public space for so long, it being such an important matter, everybody should know about it. But I don't know whether they have really, really thought how they are going to deal with 10,000 families, most likely libertarian-headed families. Libertarians are the right-wing Americans, many of whom are just racist. I'm not saying that all of them are, but many of them are racist. So when they say my Nevis brethren, they don't mean it in the same way that you and I mean it at all. Now, I am much better integrated into Nevis, having lived here for ever so long, than most people of a different complexion. And as it happens, my 2 and only grandsons will actually look like I do. Not really just like me. But I can't even assume that anybody has a conception of what 10,000 of these families, meaning 40,000 people, will mean. All voters, too, all the adults, if they brought their citizenship, there's no preventing it. If Premier Brantley says, oh well, they'll be in a separate zone, we'll carve it off, it won't be within any parish, he can't do that. That's all up to the Boundaries Commission. And the Boundaries Commission is surely not going to declare a dead area for all these people to live in. It's part of a constituency, part of St George's and part of St James's. And so it will always be until the Boundary Commission alter it. That is the fact of the matter. Now, what I don't like about what has happened just lately is that the Prime Minister has got his two committees going, one to investigate and strengthen the declared the SSZ Act, Authorisation Act, and the other to look at the Destiny Project. Brantley objects, I think, that he should be looking at the Destiny Project at all. But, in fact, he's got to sign off on it. If he does absolutely nothing, nothing happens. And that's, frankly, the best course. Do nothing. Do not sign anything. Just proceed. And then if they're a genuine development, they'll come back and they'll say, we need to make a contract with you. And it won't include the provisions of the SSZ Act. But actually, all they have come here for is to get their own area inhabited by a lot of other libertarians so that they can live subject to their own laws, which include no taxation, no regulations for cryptocurrency, no regulations for manufacture or whatever you do of cryptocurrency. And that's why, being confident, they've already sent Mrs. Brantley, the Premier's wife, 3 of those crypto machines because they're confident that they will have them in use very soon. Well, I say to the Prime Minister, don't sign, don't allow it. But what I'm unhappy about is that I now see his Attorney General, Garth Wilkin, saying that a contract with Destiny will be under the old law. Now that means the SSZ Act, without it having any strengthening amendments to it. If that is so, then it is a complete farce to have set up a commission to advise the Premier, to advise the Prime Minister upon the Act if you're not going to consider or use the advice. And, my goodness me, there's been some advice in public from the Bar Association and the Chamber of Commerce, who've torn that piece of legislation to shreds, saying why it's inconsistent and why it must be changed. Well, you can't sensibly now contract with someone to whom you owe no obligation in law under an old act, when you've already said and when you know that that act is defective. Come on, amend the act and then see if these Destiny people actually want to make use of it. That is the procedure that ought to happen. And I hope it will.
My position on that whole SSZ Act is to repeal it. What start by the morning can't come good the evening. And this AG, Garth Wilkin, he's on the wrong path and on the wrong side of life for the Kittitian and Division people. While they went in there and fast-track this SSZ Act to accommodate the Destiny Project, because that is why that SSZ Act came into place so quick. In less than 3 months, this bill was introduced on the 31st of, not even 3 months, basically you could say less than a month. It was introduced by the Prime Minister on the 31st of July 2025. It got its second and third reading on the 11th of August 2025. And before the end of August, it was an act, which is the law. I have never seen nothing fly through that fast. This Prime Minister have come back when the public cried out and said to tighten up. He's willing to tighten up the SSZ Act. Well, Brother Gaskell, Daddy Gaskell, This is where the Prime Minister and I are going to continue to butt head, because the Prime Minister that I met, the heart that he showed me, and his actions is two different persons at this time. Why I say this? We got independence in 1983 from Great Britain. We have a constitution. That constitution gives us the right for any individual that born outside of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis can claim citizen by descent from their parent or grandparent. Any individual that born outside of the Federation, you can file for citizenship after 1983, based on that constitution, by your parent and grandparent. That has been the case. My son, Jeffrey Maurice Jr., he got his citizenship from his mother, his grandmother, my mother, basically. Today, under a Dr. Juliet Labor administration, under this AG God Wilkin, they have changed the practice. I call it a practice because there's no law to stop it, that no one can now claim citizenship by descent from their grandparent, only from a parent. So while we are encouraging foreigners, libertarians into the country through the back door, we are basically telling our citizens who have a right to gain citizenship from your grandparent that you no longer can do that under this Dr. Juliet Labor administration.
But if the Constitution says that you can claim it under your grandparent, that is that.
That's been the practice. I have both copies of the application where they remove now the grandparent side of it. Up until last year, I know of individuals who claim citizenship by their grandparent who was allowed. I actually went to the National Security Office, and they basically ran from my camera just like everybody else does. I was advised to go to the Attorney General's office to get information, and basically everybody, they don't want to touch it. They say, this matter don't even make sense, but they do not want to speak on camera. And these are the things that really keep me up at nights. You listen to, and I'm going into another segment, you listen to this government, this Prime Minister, and many other Prime Ministers speaking about beach access in St. Kitts and Nevis. That is the law. That is a right. And Tuesday evening, Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, just after midnight, I witnessed a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis giving directive to some expats to use an excavator to destroy access, vehicular access at South Friars Beach. That was just this past.
I know about that.
Right? The fight still continues. Just before I came across to Nevis yesterday, I went over there and I was able to get a little access through the back road where somebody makes space for a vehicle to pass. And by this morning, I received a call that they went back there last night and blocked the road with boulders again. The road are blocked. We elect politicians to run our country, hopefully to elevate and empower the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. We are not getting that. So when I first heard of you, and over the past couple of months that I've met you, I have seen you and your son and actually your whole family came across to St. Kitts to support the rights of the people in St. Kitts and Nevis. And what even more, it tore the heartstring when I found out that your wife is blind. And she managed with you and the rest of the marchers to march around the march route in St. Kitts Nevis.
She's not fully blind, but she is very impaired.
Okay, but I was told she was blind. So for me, I look at it that these are individuals that are coming out to stand up for the people who should be standing up for themselves. And you're not seeing them.
Well, I'm sad about that. The trouble is people march only when it's something that they think affects their immediate pocket.
And that's the problem. I am afraid that in short time, if this Destiny project ever get the green light, there'll be no more Nevis. The citizens of Nevis, the residents of Nevis, we're going back to colonial days.
No, we can't have that. The British at least gave us a decent law. I mean, I'm not a colonialist in thought, never have been. But they gave us a decent law. And in a way, they set us on the right track. Not well, but they set us on the right track.
I look forward to a positive outcome with all of these stuff. And we've been speaking now for more than an hour, actually. About an hour and 45 minutes.
I would say one thing, that I'll comment on what you said, which is that you should repeal it rather than reform the Act. I agree 100%. I would want to repeal this Act. I think it is too difficult to get anything from it that makes sense, really, and strengthen it. I think that probably the Bar Association, when they talked about it, first of all, didn't want it to appear that it was just too plain political to say it should be repealed, and they said it should be altered, changed, strengthened. But in reality, it's not an act, in my view, that you can start playing around with and come back with something sensible. It'll really turn out, if you do that, to be meaningless.
Not only meaningless, it'll be damaging for the Federation and for the people.
Yeah. Repeal it, I say. That's where I would like to make clear that I'm with you on that.
Well, I would hope that the powers that be and the citizens of St. Kitts Nevis are paying attention, because so far it have started. Right now, I see a young man that has invested so much, both him and his family, in the marine industry in our federation. I'm speaking of the gentleman they call Reginald Francis.
Yeah.
St. Kitts Marines work down at New Guinea, St. Kitts. Again, I tried to bring some awareness to that situation, because after the gentleman put in not just his blood, sweat, and tears, but his finances to put such an operation in New Guinea, they are saying it's not so. But this government are enabling foreigners to come and take over. This gentleman had a sales agreement from the previous administration, dated back of January 2021. This government went into office in August 2022. This past July, last year, and this year, the Sustainable Department has been selling lots of land within those areas that has been occupied by the St. Kitts Marine Works. What does that tell you? They don't respect the sales agreement, and they intend to run the gentleman out of business, while they are campaigning for some $40 million marine and deep water port coming from Nigeria, where the Prime Minister is trying to build a bridge from St. Kitts to Nigeria. Nevis is only, I would say, 2 miles on the south side of St. Kitts. South Peninsula across to Nevis is only about 2 miles. We could easily build a bridge there. But you have no interest in building that bridge, because I guess you folks at Nevis don't have enough to pep. But in Nigeria, they can pep up from that end. But like I said, Brother Gaskell, Daddy Gaskell, we could go on and on with many things. The conversation is a great deal to go on with. And I don't really want to go past the 2 hour. I try to do a 2 hour program the most, and we are knocking on that number. So is there anything else that you would like to?
Good Lord.
that you would like to add before we're about 12 minutes into that 2-hour conversation?
Well, I would just like to say thank you, DJ, for coming over to see me. And I thank you in particular for your efforts, your continual efforts on your programme to try to make sure things are done right. That's all.
Yes, and when I heard of you, it was a good feeling to know that you're not only paying attention to what I say on the program, but you also, we share the similar opinions on many of the issues, and you're about development of St. Kitts and Nevis and the people of Nevis. And I would hope that the people of Nevis understand when the comparisons are made about the amount of land that you might have gathered and Nevis. You cannot compare the James Gaskell era to the Destiny era. It's apples and grapes are night and day.
You wanted me to say something about that. I could if you have time.
Sure.
Yes. I'm afraid the young James Gaskell, aged 26 or so, came here with the thoughts of investment and following on how to deal with that investment. But he thought that land was inexpensive and it would be a very good investment. So he bought really as much as he possibly could initially. And then, after a little while, he started thinking more seriously about it. And he realised that this was not really quite right. And that one person should not, from outside, come and have so much land. So I sold off some good portions of it. And as it happens, the lands that I had and sold off were sold back to Novitians. And one of them, indeed, is one of the persons who's absolutely standing out against Destiny. So I'm proud of that. That's Livy Williams. And he will not sell or partake of his of Destiny by making use of his land for Destiny. What he's going to do if, in some perverted fashion, Destiny is given compulsory purchase powers, I don't know. But he's got a piece of land that lies strictly and lengthwise, a long piece of land that disrupts practically the centre of the Destiny project. So they will really want him out, but he doesn't want to be out, and he's not obviously willing for any offers. So what I've got left now is quite a lot by some people's standards, no doubt. I've got about 34 acres of Montpelier estate. Most of it, I suppose, is up on a rather steep part of Pond Hill, can't much be used. Some of it anyway, it's not prime land because I have sold off most of it, some to foreign folk, but the majority of it to Novitians. That means to say I've sold off, I think, some 66 acres out of the 100 acre to Novitians mostly. And that's in addition to the lands I sold early on when I decided that it was not a good idea for me to be owning so much land. So what I'm left with is the 34 acres. I sold a little bit of land, of course, to Premier Brantley, which he was pleased about. It's right next to his house, and it made a little addition to it. And I certainly don't grudge him that. That was fine for him. The estate I have got left is called Ward's Estate, and it's a piece of mountainside next to Pinney's estate, and it is theoretically valuable estate land. But also I must try to advise and warn the Vishans that we must keep trees as much as possible, and that Ward's land grows halfway up the mountain. It's not one of those that goes to the top, as some of them do, in a sort of triangulated fashion. It stops at about, what, 1,200 feet or so. Well, I have converted into an orchard, mostly mangoes, about 17 acres of that, and we have done nothing with the rest except for the very bottom, closest to town, 1 acre, which we tried to make into 1.5 acres or so, which we tried to make into a garden for the Charlestown Primary School. But one way and another, we didn't get enough support from the government about it, and it failed. It was probably my fault for not getting that full support before launching into it. But anyway, we tried for a school garden and we failed. So we've taken back that piece of land, and my daughter-in-law and Charles now have it, and they are making use of it. But the rest of it, pretty much, the wisest course is for it to remain as trees. And don't be sold to anybody else. Just keep it as part of Nevis, because trees keep the island cool. If we had no trees, we have no idea what temperature this island would be, but it would be much hotter, and it might be impossible, and probably would be, impossible to grow very much of the kind of things we grow on it at present. And that's a most considerable danger. We must keep the trees. And I would like to do my part up there by keeping those trees. And if I have that in mind, it's better that I have the estate than anybody else does, government included.
Well, your heart and your statements are in the right place, and you just use the magic word there, so I got to go back to the magic word that you use. You said mango trees. Are there mangoes on the trees?
No, that's just trouble. Most of them have not produced blossom, and they're quite substantial trees. Some of them are as big as that one you see over there. That one's been blossoming and fruiting.
That's full with blossoms, yeah.
That's full of blossom, but the ones up at Ward's, many of them, even of that size or perhaps nearly that size, have not blossomed. I think we may have pruned them too vigorously at an early stage, and they think it's their function to make timber and not make blossom.
That's a good one.
Anyway, I'm not happy with them. One day they will, and we've got a lot of trees, and they're grafted, they're all grafted.
My favourite.
They're about, up there, they're about maybe a dozen different grafts. Here I've got 40 different grafts.
Okay.
So one day you can sample many of them.
So you're a scientist in the mango business, while Charles is a scientist in the sea business, in the marine business?
No, I'm not a scientist in anything. I'm an amateur at everything.
Well, I look forward to sampling your mangoes when
You're ever so welcome.
when the time is ripe. And I wanted to thank you again and the wife for welcoming me into my home this morning, because you told me come into your home. So I'm happy to be in my home. I'm happy to speak in with you, and your information, and it will help a lot of folks out there to think differently of life and the opportunities that might be lying ahead of them, that they don't realize that there are many young Nivision and Kittitian out there could very well be the next Charles Gaskell or the James Gaskell, or anyone that will contribute to the development of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Well, DJ, thank you very much for coming. The only thing I have to say is don't make it the one and only time. Come back again.
Well, I realized something coming into your establishment this morning. There are some folks that live on the property that I don't think we're going to get along too well. Your dogs, I don't think they're going to welcome me back without someone walking me in. So, but I will look forward to come back and spend some time with you, just sitting around and getting more. You don't have to be a live broadcast, but just picking the brain and having a conversation, learning about the struggle. I know you gave the age, your birth date, but I need to know your age, your actual age.
8 and 8.
88? 88. Well, you got a serious memory there for an 88-year-old. So, we need to get...
You know, DJ, what happens with memory is that you lose early and late memories, not the early ones.
Okay.
You often come around
The long term stick around.
You kind of reinforce them by knowing them over a long period of time. I have a lot of difficulty with names now.
So why you don't have a difficulty with DJ? Every time we speak or you see me, you shout DJ. Is it because it's just two letters?
It might be. I probably shan't be calling you XYZ next time.
All right, Daddy. It's now 11 a.m., so we have completed actually 2 hours of a conversation.
Goodness me.
And I really want to thank you for the energy. You said you don't have my energy, but trust me, you can give me some serious competition.
No, DJ, not at all, never. Thank you anyway, very much.
Yes, so I just want to take the opportunity. DJ Mawisha here, I've been talking to the senior, Daddy James Gaskell here. I want to thank his son, my adopted brother there, Brother Charles Gaskell, for setting up this conversation. It was very informative, very educational. I also want to thank Mammy Gaskell for greeting me earlier. I want to thank Sister Lynn for accommodating. A journey across here to see the Gaskells and really have some good documentary conversation and the experience in the earlier days. We have heard about the 1967 situation. Every June you hear the propagandists out there spreading the rumors. And the politics that is taking place in St. Kitts and Nevis, I pray for the day that folks will understand that we are just passing through. No matter what we acquire on this earth, we are just passing through. And it's good that we have the opportunity to enjoy the little we're enjoying, but let's try and leave St. Kitts Nevis a better place for the future generation. The politics is destroying the people, it's destroying the fabric of family and friends. As I said to people all the time, you would find that citizens get upset with you because you disagree on a particular topic when it comes to a political party. And my way coming here a while ago, I saw the premier and say hi to him and everything like that. And you would surprise the conversation we would have, which is genuine. I don't have nothing personal against the premier. He don't have anything personal against me. I would speak about the political aspect of how, whether the prime minister, the premier, any politician, how they deal with the people and the policies. But venue, the prime minister knows, the AG knows, the premier knows what they're doing. But the brainwash, what they have fed to the people to keep them wanted. Because, Brother Gaskell, Daddy Gaskell, what I realize is this. One of the biggest trick in life is to make sure someone is needy, hungry, and dependent. And that is what these politicians have done to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. So they could do all this damage for 4.5, 5 years to people. They will come around on the eve of an election and give them a cup of water, a barbecue, some bands performing, our artists, and these people, in their drunken mind, put them right back there for another 5 years to destroy their livelihood again. And that is where I am trying to open up the minds of the people. So on that, Daddy Gaskell, I'll give you the final say before I sign off.
Well, I have no special final say, except again to thank you, DJ, so much for coming, and carry on doing what you are doing, which is trying to show the right course for people, which is look after others. That's all.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And Mommy, thanks for being a part of the the conversation. You've been here listening to it, and I'm pretty sure there's no objection. Daddy Gaskell, if there's no objection, I would love to show Mommy and the live feed. Is that okay?
Of course.
All right, so Mommy, you can wave to the folks.
Hey.
So it's good to be here. It's good to see you. And as Daddy Gaskell said, I will come again, maybe not for a live broadcast, but just to hang out with you guys and have a conversation.
I'm very, very pleased and can't wait to see you. Okay, as long as you come.
Okay, thank you, Mommy. So, my good folks, this brings me to the end of this conversation, and I will cherish this moment wherever I go, because without this opportunity, I don't think that the Univisions and Kitty shall understand the struggle. Until such time, I'm out. DJ Maui Show.